Hi, my name is Colleen Rogers, and I'm here today with Renee Hoagenson. Renee Hoagenson is running for Missouri's 4th Congressional District, and she wants to represent Missouri's 4th Congressional District in the House of Representatives.
Hi,
Hi, thanks for being with us, Renee.
thank you for having me.
What made you want to run for Missouri's 4th Congressional District?
Well, I see our government as being run by people who have agendas other than serving the people of their district, and this district is no exception to that. We need to have people step up who are simply here for the purpose of serving the people. I personally have a long history of service. Since I was in my early 20s, I have been involved in service of some sort. And if I were able to represent Missouri's 4th Congressional in Congress, I would consider that the highest form of service that I could imagine.
Well, I've heard you speak a few different times, and one of the things that you often talk about are house cleaning reforms. Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean with house cleaning reforms?
Sure. When I talk about house cleaning reforms, I'm talking about campaign finance reform, lobbying reform, and redistricting reform. I believe that reforms in these areas will get our government back on track to serve the people again. We will recreate our government in a transparent way, and it will have the right focus on creating legislation that helps the American people.
Great. And another thing that you focus on with your campaign is the family. Can you talk to us today about the family and how that relates to your platform?
Sure. I think of it as fixing the foundation for families. We need to ensure that everyone working 40 hours a week can make a living for their family. As it is now, we have very low unemployment, but in many cases, that's because so many people are working 2 and 3 jobs. If a family is working 60 and 70 hours a week, it's very difficult to be home parenting children and instilling those family values that we all know are so important. So it's never been more important that we have a situation where we have living wages. Everybody working 40 hours a week should be able to make a living for their family.
And going along the lines of family, can you speak a little bit about some of the obstacles that families run into on a day-to-day basis? Outside wages.
Outside way, such as healthcare.
Healthcare is a great idea.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Healthcare is a major drain on the American wallet. And one of the reasons that I am for Medicare for All is it would save so much money for our federal government, it would save so much money for our businesses, and it would save so much money for the American family. It would literally give the American family on average a 25 to 35% raise in their take-home pay. So it would be really significant. The other thing about Medicare for All that I think is actually even more important is the fact that we literally have people dying in the United States of America over money and over the price of healthcare and the price of pharmaceuticals. And that is morally reprehensible.
That has to have a huge drain on families.
It's a huge drain on families. And again, you literally have people, especially people living in poverty, that can't afford their medication. I've had 4 different people since I've been running for Congress come to me and tell me they've had elderly relatives die because they couldn't afford their medication in the United States of America. And, when you think about it, I mean, the United States, we're not even allowed to negotiate pharmaceutical prices, and our pharmaceutical prices have gone up 164% in the last 8 years alone. We can't sustain that. The other problem is that we're paying twice as much at minimum than any other country in the world for pharmaceuticals and medical care. So it's a real problem, and it's completely unnecessary. Basically, Congress is allowing pharmaceutical companies to profiteer off of the backs of Americans, and it needs to stop. So a Medicare for All system, to me, would be it would make the most sense. It would be the easiest, and I'll tell you why. Our outcomes 65 plus are the best in the world. We have the healthiest people in the world 65 plus. We are dead last in health outcomes for those that are 64 and younger. So Medicare for All works really well. The other thing about Medicare for All that's important is that it's inexpensive. It only has a 3% cost to administrate. When you compare that 18% of the American GDP is spent on healthcare, you can see that Medicare for All would really create substantial savings for us. And it would be easy on our system. We could simply lower the age of Medicare until everyone had care. And personally, I think we should expand it so that we don't have need for supplemental insurance, co-pays, pharmaceuticals. I think we should also include vision and dental. And we can pay for this really easy. That's always the question. That's always the question. How are we going to pay for this? Well, there's a couple of different things that we can talk about there. We can talk about the fact that we have so much money in the hands of pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, and administration that if we revamped those industries, we would have a lot of money that we could use to supplement this program. Or we could simply increase the withholding from the Medicare for Medicare from your paycheck, and people will say, "Oh, well, now you want to increase taxes." Well, except for this, think about the fact that you would on the other side of that completely save 25 to 35% of your take-home pay. So now an additional 3% doesn't look so bad, does it?
That's a really good point.
Mhm.
Definitely would have to answer that question in the 4th District on cost.
Oh, yes, and I do. I certainly do, yes.
And can
yes.
and speaking of cost to Medicare, can you talk a little bit about the tax cuts that have
Sure,
just been?
yes, you bet. These tax cuts are completely fiscally irresponsible. I mean, you have a Congress that has basically gutted the American the American coffers in order to create a tax break for the wealthiest 1%. And it's exactly the opposite of what is needed in this country, and it creates a situation where it's easy for Congress to say, "Oh, well, we need to cut these social programs. We need to cut Medicare, Medicaid. We need to cut Social Security." And again, those things are on the chopping block as they were last year, and now they're justified by a tax reform that was unnecessary and harmful to the American public and harmful really to our total debt. In about 5 to 7 years, we will not even be able to afford any principal on the debt. We will simply be able to afford, debt. We won't even be able to pay the full debt service, is what I'm saying. So, it's just fiscally irresponsible. It's not something that you would do in your own family budget. And speaking of budget, I would say that our Congress has made it very clear what they value from this tax reform and from the cuts that they have tried to make. A budget is really reflective of our values, and we budget what we value. And when we don't budget for the American people, when we don't budget to honor our commitments to our seniors and our veterans, as an example, well, I think you can see where I'm going there. This Congress is beholden to big donors and special interest groups, and it's very obvious by the legislation that they've put on the floor and that they've continued to fight to pass.
These are all really important issues to the foundations of our family. Another important foundation to our family is education. Can you tell us a little bit about how education plays into your platform?
Education is critically important. It's important to each and every person in this country, each and every child growing up, of course, their future. It's also important for the future of this country as a whole when you consider our economic future as well as the future of the security of this country. I mean, it's very important that we have a good, solid education. But there are a couple of other reasons that education is important in this country as well, particularly for rural communities. Rural communities, have become more decimated over these last 20 and 30 years, and in the way that we have changed the antitrust laws, particularly back in the 80s, have contributed to the annihilation, really, of rural communities. And so what we have now is we have rural communities who often really have only their public education system as the cornerstone of their economy. And so when you talk about going to a smaller budget for a rural community, for a school, you're cutting employees, you're cutting families' pay, and we already have schools in Missouri's 4th Congressional that only go 4 days a week. So it makes it really difficult for the employees of that school district. But third, and maybe one of the even more important aspects of the situation is that we have to have a strong school system in order to attract growth and opportunities and coming into an area. So as an example, if if a professional, if an attorney or a doctor is considering moving into a community and the spouse says, we're not going there, the schools are terrible, well, that community has lost the opportunity to have that professional or that business or manufacturer come to their area and spur economic growth. So education and our public systems are more important than ever.
Well, I agree with you, and I thank you for coming here and sharing that with us. Families and wages, healthcare, education, but it's so hard to move forward in this polarized system. A lot of times I hear you talking about it's time to get the chaos out of Congress. What is most chaotic in Congress?
Well, to me, one of the most chaotic aspects of Congress is they can't get anything done. I mean, you have congressmen who are so polarized, who are such extreme examples of their political ideology, and they're literally unwilling to discuss compromise in any way or to work together in any way. And so they seem to really thwart any sort of legislation that would actually help the American people. And I just feel that they've really lost their focus. And we were talking earlier about the house cleaning reforms. Lobbying reform is one of my main platforms. It's one of the things that I believe the most in. And I think, in my mind, lobbying really contributes to this really polarized Congress. And so if you have a lobbyist that is really making significant campaign contributions to a politician through a PAC, and this politician wants to compromise and work across the aisle on a piece of legislation that affects that PAC or that lobbyist, then they can say, well, we're going to go ahead and move our support to your more polarizing or extreme primary opponent. And now you have a very polarized Congress. And that's really how we've gotten here, and it's how we continue to stay here. And so it's one of the reasons that I believe that we need to get we need to make sure that our lobbyists are not giving contributions in any way to our congressmen and not having too close of a relationship there. So, and I think earlier when we were talking about house cleaning reforms, obviously lobbying reform is a big piece of that. We were talking about campaign finance reform. We need to get the money out of our elections and ensure that each of our political candidates has a level playing field, and so that the constituents can really measure each politician or candidate based on their own platform, their values, and their merit. And then redistricting reform is also something I should go ahead and explain a little bit more about as well. We have a situation where whatever party is most powerful at the year 2010, 2020, every 10 years, that party gets to determine who the voters are going to be for their congressman for the next 10 years, and that's not true democracy. And so we need to have significant reform there. And there are a handful of states that we can look at who are already doing it differently to find a way to really get back to real democratic democracy, real representation.
Yeah. I think a lot of the audience can agree that our democracy is in a place where it's never been before. We are very polarized, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, we haven't really been able to turn on the TV without seeing Putin. Do you think Russia can have an impact on the people in the 4th Congressional District?
Well, there's a lot to say about what's going on right now in terms of Russia and how Russia is affecting the United States as a whole and potentially the 4th Congressional District. Most recently, we just had a story come out about the Russians attempting to hack Senator McCaskill's campaign software, and yes, I 100%. I mean, it's right here at our back door, and there's no reason to think that the Russians can't and or won't try to penetrate any potential congressperson's information and affect the elections. And I for one am calling for paper ballots across my district. My campaign is currently calling all of the clerks in the 24 counties that I hope to represent, asking how the election process will go on August 7th and then again on November 6th. We need to have paper ballots. We need to ensure and protect democracy from these invasions. And that's, we've got to get back to basics, but it 100% can affect Missouri's 4th Congressional.
Okay, well, Renee, I don't really have many other questions for you. Do you have anything else you want to add or tell the viewers today?
Well, I hope that you'll vote for me. I very much am planning to be your next Congresswoman, and I very much hope that you will support me in that effort and know that I plan to work for you. That is what a representative truly is. I'll be available to you, and I will also be holding town halls regularly, and I will also be communicating with you from Washington, D.C. while I am there and while I am facing legislation. And I will want to hear from you your opinion about each of those bills. That's something that we have not had in Missouri's 4th for quite a while, and we need to get back to representative government again. Please vote for me on August 7th and then again on November 6th, and I look forward to working for you in Washington, D.C.
Great. Thanks, Renee, for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Mhm.